You've come a long way. You changed how you think. You became more aware of your patterns, your reactions, your inner world. And yet, if you're honest, something feels unfinished, as if life moved, but then stopped short. Not broken, just paused, like a process that reached most of the way and stalled right before completion. Here's the strange part. It doesn't feel like failure. It feels like being almost there. And no one ever asks you this question, even though it changes everything. What if nothing is missing, and nothing went wrong? What if the reason your reality hasn't fully shifted isn't lack of effort, discipline, or awareness, but something small, invisible, that you've been doing every single day without realizing it? Stay with that question for a moment, because the answer doesn't ask you to add anything. It asks you to notice where things quietly stopped moving. There's a moment that happens quietly, almost politely, in the journey of anyone who begins to wake up. At first, observation feels like freedom. You notice your thoughts instead of drowning in them. You catch emotional reactions before they run the show. You pause, you breathe. You feel more spacious inside. And because this brings relief, because it works, something subtle slips in. You start to watch yourself more often, then more carefully, then more seriously. Without realizing it, observation slowly shifts its tone. What was once curiosity becomes supervision. What was once openness becomes monitoring. You're no longer just aware of what arises inside you. You're checking it, measuring it, asking silently, is this the right thought? Is this aligned? Am I doing this correctly? This is the silent mistake almost every seeker makes. Observation turns into control. Not control in the obvious sense of forcing or suppressing, but in a refined, almost spiritualized way. You don't tell yourself, I must control reality. You tell yourself, I'm just being conscious. Yet beneath that, there's tension. A subtle effort to keep things in a certain state. A background intention to maintain calm, clarity, progress. And here's the paradox. The moment observation carries an agenda, it stops being observation. True observation is neutral. It has no preference for what should appear next. It doesn't lean forward. It doesn't brace itself. It simply allows what is already happening to be seen clearly. But when observation is mixed with the desire to improve, optimize, or stabilize, it tightens. It starts interfering. Many people don't notice this shift because it feels responsible. It feels mature. It feels like growth. After all, isn't awareness supposed to make you better, more balanced, less reactive? So you keep observing. But now you're observing with a quiet hope attached, a hope that this awareness will finally lock things into place, that if you stay conscious enough, the anxiety won't return, the confusion won't come back, the old patterns won't resurface. And when they do resurface, because they always do, something else happens. You observe them faster, sharper, with less patience. Why is this still here? I thought I had moved past this. I've done the work. This is where control fully replaces observation, even if the language remains spiritual. You're no longer witnessing the mind, you're managing it. You're trying to keep reality from misbehaving. The problem is not that you're doing something wrong. The problem is that you're doing something extra. Reality doesn't respond well to being managed from the inside. Consciousness, when left alone, unfolds naturally. But when watched with expectation, it contracts. It becomes self-conscious, heavy, slow. Think about how different it feels to be looked at by someone who is simply present versus someone who is evaluating you. Even if they say nothing, you feel it. Your body changes, your breath adjusts. You're no longer free to be spontaneous. Your inner world reacts the same way. When awareness is soft, thoughts move freely and often dissolve on their own. When awareness is tense, thoughts become defensive. They repeat, they resist, they linger longer than before. This is why so many people reach a point where they feel stuck, even though they are more conscious than they've ever been. They are observing constantly, but the observation has lost its innocence. It's no longer a window. It's a spotlight. And a spotlight creates pressure. The most ironic part is that this mistake usually comes from sincerity, from wanting to live truthfully, from wanting to stay awake. But wakefulness isn't something you hold on to. The moment you try to hold it, You turn it into an object, something fragile, something that can be lost. So you guard it. You check yourself throughout the day. You scan your reactions. You monitor your tone, your thoughts, your emotions. You become very good at noticing subtle shifts inside you, but not at letting them pass. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, life begins to feel less fluid. This is the stage where people say, "I'm aware, but nothing is moving anymore." Or, "I feel like I understand so much, yet my outer life isn't reflecting it." Or, "I'm doing all the right things, but something feels blocked." What's blocked isn't reality. It's spontaneity. Observation was never meant to be a guard standing at the gate of your experience. It was meant to be the open sky in which everything passes. The mistake is not observing too much. It's observing with a clenched hand instead of an open one. And this clenched quality doesn't announce itself loudly. It hides behind good intentions. It disguises itself as discipline, consistency, dedication. That's why almost everyone falls into it at some point. But there's a cost. The more observation becomes control, the more effort sneaks into places where effort was never required. And effort, even subtle effort, introduces resistance. Not immediately, not dramatically, but enough to slow the natural unfolding of change. This is where the next confusion begins to form, because from here many people respond in the only way they know, by trying harder, by refining techniques, by increasing focus, by adding more intention. And that's when the strange feeling appears, the sense that the more you try to change, the less things actually change. There's a moment when effort starts to feel logical. You notice something isn't moving, so you lean in. You focus more. You apply what you've learned with greater precision. From the outside, it looks like commitment. From the inside, it feels like tightening a grip. At first, effort seems to help. You redirect a thought. You calm an emotion. You pause before reacting. These small wins reinforce the idea that change happens because you push it into place. So when life slows down or resists, your instinct is simple: increase the pressure. But something strange happens when effort becomes the main driver. The harder you try to change, the heavier everything feels. Decisions take longer, emotions linger, synchronicities fade. What once flowed now requires management. This isn't because you've lost your ability, it's because you've changed the relationship. Reality has a rhythm of its own. When you move with it, things adjust quietly. When you try to steer it from the front, it stiffens. Not in rebellion, but in response. Just like a body that tenses when you try to force it into a position, your inner world contracts when it senses demand. Trying to change carries an unspoken message. This moment is not enough yet. Even when wrapped in positive language, that message is felt. It introduces friction between where you are and where you think you should be. That friction is subtle but constant. You might notice it as a background strain, a feeling that you're always a step behind your own expectations, that you're maintaining awareness instead of resting in it. You're aiming for clarity instead of letting it surface. And because effort is active, it keeps the mind busy. Busy minds don't listen well. They monitor, they compare, they calculate progress. The question quietly shifts from "what is happening now" to "is this working?" The moment that question enters, attention leaves the present and leans into the future. You're no longer with what is, you're negotiating with what should be. Change, ironically, needs the opposite. It requires presence without bargaining. Many people confuse effort with responsibility. They believe that if they stop trying, things will fall apart, that without constant attention, old patterns will take over. So they keep pushing, even when pushing is what's exhausting them. This is where intention becomes tension. Intention, when clear and light, sets direction and then steps back. Tension stays, it watches, it checks, it hovers, and hovering interrupts natural movement. Imagine trying to fall asleep while monitoring how relaxed you are. The effort to relax becomes the very thing that keeps you awake. The same dynamic applies to inner change. When you try to change a thought, you keep it alive. When you try to dissolve an emotion, you give it a central role. When you try to maintain a state, you turn it into a task. Tasks demand energy. States emerge when energy is allowed to settle. The more you try, the more you signal that something is missing. And whatever is treated as missing becomes the focus. not because reality is stubborn, but because attention amplifies what it leans toward. This is why some of the most frustrating plateaus happen right after genuine progress. You've seen that awareness works. You've tasted clarity. You've felt shifts. So you try to recreate them. You remember how it felt and aim for that feeling again. But what you're aiming at is a memory. Life doesn't repeat states on command. It responds to presence. The moment you try to reproduce a result, you move out of the conditions that created it. You turn a living process into a technique. That's when things begin to feel mechanical. You meditate, but watch the clock inside. You observe your thoughts, but wait for silence. You act calmly, but hope it leads somewhere. Every action carries a quiet expectation, and expectation narrows perception. It filters reality through outcome. Over time, this creates fatigue. Not physical tiredness, but a subtle weariness of always trying to get somewhere else. You might even start questioning yourself. Why isn't this working anymore? Am I missing something? Do I need to go deeper? The truth is simpler and harder to accept. Nothing is wrong. The system isn't broken, it's overmanaged. Change doesn't respond to pressure, it responds to space. Space allows patterns to reveal themselves without defense. Pressure makes them hide or harden. When effort dominates, awareness loses its softness. It becomes sharp, narrow, and strategic. And strategy belongs to the mind that wants control. This doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop interfering. There's a difference between showing up and steering, between attention and manipulation, between allowing and insisting. The frustration you feel when nothing changes is not a sign that you need more effort. It's a signal that effort has crossed into interference. That awareness has been tasked with producing results instead of witnessing reality. And here's where the confusion deepens, because most people believe awareness itself is the tool that creates change. So they keep applying it like pressure, not realizing that awareness only works when it's free of effort. Which leads to a crucial misunderstanding that almost no one clarifies: the belief that awareness itself is a form of doing rather than a way of seeing. There's a very specific point where things start to blur. It doesn't happen at the beginning of the journey, and it doesn't happen to people who are asleep to themselves. It happens after you've already tasted awareness, after you've felt the difference between being lost in thought and noticing thought, after you've seen how simply seeing can soften a reaction. At that point, awareness feels powerful, and that's where the confusion begins. Because once awareness seems to do something, the mind quietly claims it as a tool, something you can apply, something you can use to fix, adjust, or optimize your inner state. Awareness stops being a field you rest in and becomes an action you perform. You don't say, "I'm forcing awareness." You say, "I'm being mindful." But inside, there's movement, a reaching, a subtle leaning toward a preferred outcome. Calm instead of restlessness, clarity instead of uncertainty, flow instead of friction. That leaning is effort. Most people assume effort always feels heavy, obvious, or strained, but the effort mixed with awareness is refined, polite, almost invisible. It feels like attentiveness, like responsibility, like care. And because it's quiet, it often goes unquestioned. You might notice it as a constant internal adjustment, a small correction whenever a thought appears, a gentle nudge away from discomfort, a background intention to stay present, to stay aligned, to stay awake. But awareness doesn't stay awake by trying. The moment awareness is something you do, it is no longer awareness. It's attention guided by preference. It's perception shaped by desire. And desire, even subtle, bends what is seen. This is why so many people say, "I'm aware, but I still feel effort," or "I'm present, but it's tiring." True awareness doesn't tire you. What tires you is the effort layered on top of it. Awareness itself is effortless. It's already happening. You don't make yourself aware of a sound, the sound appears in awareness. You don't generate the knowing of a thought, the knowing is already there when the thought arises. Effort enters when you try to manage what awareness reveals. Instead of letting a thought pass, you track it. Instead of letting an emotion move, you analyze it. Instead of letting a sensation be felt, you monitor whether it's changing. None of this is wrong, but all of it shifts awareness into activity. And activity creates a center, a sense of me doing awareness. This is the key misunderstanding. Awareness has no center. Effort always does. The moment you feel like there's someone inside being aware, effort has already slipped in. Awareness has been localized, turned into a role you're playing. This role is exhausting, even if it feels subtle. You're always on duty, always watching yourself watch, always checking if you're still present. That's not freedom, that's surveillance. And surveillance changes behavior. Your inner world starts performing. Thoughts adjust, emotions hesitate. You don't feel what you feel fully because part of you is standing back evaluating it. Experience becomes filtered, safe, controlled. This is often mistaken for maturity or spiritual stability. But something essential is missing: intimacy with what is actually happening. Effort keeps a distance. Awareness without effort dissolves it. When awareness is confused with effort, you might notice that silence feels tense. Stillness feels fragile, as if one wrong thought could break it. You hold calm instead of resting in it. You maintain presence instead of allowing it. And because you're maintaining, there's fear underneath. The fear of slipping, the fear of losing clarity, the fear that without effort, you'll fall back into old patterns. So you keep applying awareness like pressure, even when nothing seems wrong. Especially when nothing seems wrong. This is the point where awareness turns against itself. It starts blocking the very intelligence it once revealed, not dramatically, but gradually. Change slows, insights repeat, life feels flatter, more controlled, less surprising. You may even start to notice a strange contradiction. The more conscious you are, the less alive things feel. That's not because awareness reduces life. It's because effort dulls it. Awareness is receptive, effort is directive. When the two are mixed, receptivity collapses. You stop listening and start steering. You don't notice reality as it is. You notice it in relation to how close it is to your ideal. And this is where the next layer of misunderstanding begins, because now observation itself becomes conditional. You observe, but only while expecting something to happen. Some shift, some release, some confirmation that you're on the right track. Expectation quietly enters awareness and reshapes it. From the inside, it feels like waiting. From the outside, nothing moves. And without noticing, awareness has crossed a line, from seeing what is to bargaining with what comes next. At some point, almost without noticing, observation begins to lean forward. It's still quiet, still subtle, but now it's waiting for something. A shift, a release, a sign that all this inner work is paying off. This is where expectation enters. Expectation doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives disguised as patience, as trust, as I'm just staying open. But underneath, there's a timeline, a hope that something will happen because you are observing correctly. And the moment observation waits for a result, it changes its nature. Observation that is free has no future in it. It doesn't look ahead. It doesn't measure progress. It doesn't check outcomes. It simply receives what is already here. The second you expect something to happen, observation bends toward the future and away from the present. You're no longer seeing what is. You're watching to see if something changes. This creates a split. Part of your attention stays with the moment, but another part is scanning for confirmation. Is this working? Is it shifting yet? Am I doing this right? That split may feel small, but it has a powerful effect. Presence weakens when it's divided. Expectation turns observation into a transaction. You give attention in exchange for a result. Even if you never say it that way, the body feels it. The nervous system feels it. Something tightens, just enough to interfere. And interference doesn't stop experience, it distorts it. Thoughts begin to perform. Emotions hesitate. Sensations become louder or duller than they would be naturally. Not because anything is wrong, but because experience senses it's being watched for a reason. You've probably felt this in everyday life. When someone listens to you just to respond, you feel rushed. When someone listens to fix you, you feel reduced. When someone listens without agenda, you relax. You open. You say things you didn't know you were carrying. Your inner world responds the same way. When you observe with expectation, You're listening to yourself in order to get somewhere. So your inner experience stops speaking freely. It becomes strategic, guarded, repetitive. This is why people often say, "I'm observing, but I feel stuck." The observation isn't wrong, it's loaded. It's carrying a demand, and whatever carries demand invites resistance. Expectation also anchors identity. There's a quiet I behind it, the one who expects improvement, the one who wants confirmation of progress, the one who is waiting to arrive somewhere else. As long as that I is waiting, reality is subtly positioned as incomplete. You might not think this consciously, but the feeling is there. A sense that this moment is a step, not a place. A means, not an end. And when the present is treated as a means, it stops revealing itself fully. Life opens in the present, not in the result. Expectation narrows perception. You begin to notice only what supports the outcome you're hoping for, or what seems to block it. Everything else fades into the background. The richness of ordinary experience gets lost. Breath becomes something to calm you. Sensation becomes something to release. Awareness becomes something to achieve. This is the danger. Because observation was never meant to produce a state. It was meant to reveal truth. And truth often doesn't match expectations. It's messier, slower, less dramatic, but far more alive. When expectation leads, disappointment follows. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. You'll notice moments where nothing seems to happen and frustration creeps in, or doubt, or self-judgment. Why isn't this working for me? What am I missing? Those questions pull you further from observation and deeper into strategy. And strategy reinforces the idea that something needs to be fixed. This is how awareness turns into a subtle negotiation with the future. You observe now so that something will be different later. You stay present in order to arrive somewhere else. And while that seems harmless, it carries a cost. The cost is trust. Trust in the intelligence of the process. Trust that awareness, when unburdened, reorganizes things on its own. Trust that you don't need to supervise every shift. When expectation drops in, trust steps out. You may notice that even moments of peace feel temporary now, fragile, as if they need to be held or extended. And when they fade, as all states do, there's a sense of loss. You try to return to them, recreate them. That effort brings you further from the ease you're seeking. Expectation also creates time, past successes, future hopes, comparisons, measurement. Awareness doesn't operate in time. It reveals what is timeless within time, but expectation drags it back into sequence, and once awareness is tied to time, it becomes impatient. Impatience is not loud. It's a quiet restlessness, a background sense that something should be happening by now, that you've been observing long enough, that the next layer should open. This is often the moment when reality begins to feel resistant, not because it is, but because it's being pulled forward, asked to perform on schedule. And that's where another misunderstanding takes shape, one that feels personal. You begin to think the resistance is coming from outside, from circumstances, from people, from life itself. You don't yet see that the resistance may have begun the moment observation stopped resting and started waiting. At some point, you start to feel it, not as a dramatic wall, not as a clear failure, but as a quiet resistance woven into daily life. Things don't fall apart, yet they don't open either. Conversations feel flatter, opportunities stall, inner shifts slow down. It's as if reality is responding with hesitation. This is usually when people say, "Something's blocking me." But what if reality didn't suddenly become resistant? What if this friction began much earlier, at a moment that felt like success? Think back to when something first worked. A shift in perception, a sense of ease, a clear insight that changed how you related to yourself or the world. That moment was alive because it wasn't forced. You weren't trying to make anything happen. You were simply present, and presence reorganized things naturally. Then you noticed it, and noticing felt empowering. The moment you realized, this works, something changed. Not consciously, not deliberately, but subtly. Awareness picked up a direction. It started watching for repetition, for consistency, for proof. That's often when resistance begins, not because awareness is wrong, but because it became strategic. Instead of resting in openness, it began aiming. Instead of allowing, it began checking whether reality was responding correctly. Reality doesn't respond well to being checked. When life senses it's being monitored for results, it stiffens, not out of punishment, but because the relationship has changed. It's no longer a dance, it's a test. You may notice this as delays. Things that once flowed now require effort. Inner states that came easily now need maintenance. Even intuition feels quieter, as if it's waiting for you to stop interfering. This isn't life pushing back. It's life pausing. Resistance is not opposition. It's protection. It's the system conserving itself when too much pressure is applied. Just like water slows when you try to grab it, experience slows when you try to secure it. The moment you tried to repeat a past opening, you stepped out of the present. You brought memory into now. And memory carries expectation. Expectation carries tension. That tension doesn't scream, it hums. You might feel it as a background urgency, a sense that you need to keep awareness active, that if you relax too much, you'll lose ground. So you stay alert, you stay watchful, you stay slightly braced, and reality mirrors that bracing. It becomes less responsive, not because it's refusing you, but because it's meeting you at the level of effort you're offering. Tight awareness meets tight outcomes. Controlled attention meets controlled movement. This is the moment when many people turn inward even more, assuming the answer is deeper focus. They double down on observation. They refine their practices. They analyze what might be missing. But resistance doesn't come from lack of effort. It comes from excess intention. You can't relax your way into flow by trying to relax. You can't return to openness by monitoring openness. The more you try to get back to what once happened naturally, the more distant it feels. This is often experienced as irony. You're more conscious than ever, yet less free. More aware, yet less alive. You know what's happening, but you can't seem to move it. That's because movement was never yours to initiate. Reality responds to coherence, not control. When attention, expectation, and identity move together, things stabilize. When they pull in different directions, friction appears. At the moment resistance began, attention was here, but expectation was ahead. Identity was invested in being someone who knows or has awakened. That split created strain. And strain always shows up somewhere. In relationships, in work, in the body, in motivation. Something stops cooperating. You might interpret this as a lesson, a test, or a sign you're doing something wrong, but often it's simpler. It's a signal to stop repeating what once worked and start noticing what's being held. Resistance isn't asking you to push through. It's asking you to soften the grip, to see where awareness became effort, where curiosity turned into management. This is a delicate point because the mind wants a solution, a correction, another adjustment. But resistance isn't resolved by adding something. It's resolved by removing what doesn't belong. What doesn't belong is the need to make reality respond. The more you demand alignment, the more misalignment appears. The more you try to bring life back into flow, the more mechanical it feels. This isn't a failure of awareness. It's a misunderstanding of its role. Awareness reveals. It doesn't command. When reality begins to resist, it's often because awareness has been asked to do a job it was never meant to do. And as long as that demand remains unseen, resistance will feel external, as if life itself is holding back. But there's a turning point hidden inside this friction. A quiet insight that changes the direction completely. Not by doing more, but by seeing what hasn't been released yet. Because what's keeping things stuck isn't what you failed to do. It's what you're still holding on to. There is a moment when the question quietly changes. You stop asking, "What am I missing?" and start sensing, "What am I still holding?" This shift doesn't come from effort or insight. It comes from exhaustion. From realizing that adding more awareness, more understanding, more precision isn't loosening the knot. That's where the twist lives. Nothing essential was left undone. No practice was skipped. No key insight was missed. What's slowing everything down isn't an absence, it's a presence. Something subtle that never got released because it didn't look like a problem. Most people assume letting go means dropping bad habits, negative thoughts, or emotional pain. But those are the easy things. The harder release is of what once helped you, the identities, strategies, and internal postures that carried you forward at an earlier stage, but quietly overstayed their welcome. At some point, awareness worked because it was new, fresh, unburdened. You weren't trying to be someone who is aware. You were simply noticing. But over time, that noticing became part of how you see yourself. I'm someone who observes. I'm conscious. I don't react like I used to. None of that is wrong, but none of it is free. What didn't get let go of is the need to maintain that image, to protect it, to live up to it, and that need adds weight to awareness. It turns openness into a role. You may not feel proud of this identity. You may not even like it, but it's there, a quiet sense of who you've become because of what you've seen. And as long as that identity is being carried, reality has to move around it. Letting go at this level doesn't feel like relief at first, it feels like risk. If you stop holding your understanding, who are you? If you stop managing your awareness, what happens? If you stop identifying as someone who knows, will old confusion return? So the grip stays, light, but constant. This is why so many people say, I know I should surrender, but I don't know how. The truth is, you already know how. You do it every night when you fall asleep. You do it in moments of laughter. You do it when something completely absorbs you and self-monitoring disappears. Surrender isn't an action. It's the absence of one. What wasn't let go of is the inner posture of readiness, the subtle leaning forward, the sense that you need to stay aware so something doesn't go wrong. That posture was useful once. It helped you interrupt old patterns, it gave you space, but now it's the very thing that keeps you from moving further. This is difficult to see because it doesn't feel like tension. It feels like responsibility, like care, like maturity. But underneath it's still control. Not aggressive control, but careful control. And careful control is still interference. Reality doesn't need you to supervise its unfolding. Consciousness doesn't need you to guard it. The system is already self-correcting when left alone. What didn't get released is the belief that awareness must be active to be effective. This belief hides deep. It sounds reasonable. If you're not paying attention, you'll slip. If you're not conscious, you'll repeat old mistakes. But awareness doesn't disappear when effort stops. Only the manager disappears, and that manager is tired. Letting go here means allowing moments of not knowing without immediately filling the space, allowing emotions to pass without interpreting them, allowing awareness to be wide and quiet instead of sharp and focused. It also means letting go of the timeline, of the idea that you should be further by now, that the next shift should have already happened, that you're behind some invisible schedule. That timeline was never real. It was inherited from the mind's need for progress. When you drop the timeline, pressure softens. When pressure softens, resistance dissolves. Not because you did something right, but because you stopped doing what was unnecessary. This is why the missing piece doesn't feel like learning. It feels like unlearning. Not erasing insight, but loosening your grip on it, letting it breathe. You don't abandon awareness, you stop carrying it. And the moment you stop carrying it, something else becomes visible. Something that was always there, but hidden by effort. A deeper coherence that doesn't depend on attention being held or identity being maintained. This coherence is what actually stabilizes reality, not techniques, not vigilance, not control. But as long as something is still being held, even gently, that coherence can't fully show itself. And this is where the next layer opens. Because once you begin to sense what you've been holding, another question naturally arises. What exactly is it that keeps your reality so stable, even when you want it to change? What keeps your reality the way it is isn't chance and it isn't effort. It's something quieter, something so consistent that it becomes invisible. You don't notice it because it feels like you, like the natural way things are. This mechanism isn't a law of attraction idea or a mystical force working behind the scenes. It's much more ordinary than that, and because it's ordinary, it's powerful. Your reality stays stable because three things are moving together: where your attention rests, what you expect, even silently, who you believe you are in relation to what you're seeing. Most people try to change one of these without touching the others. They shift attention but keep the same expectations. Or they change expectations but protect the same identity. When these elements don't move together, reality doesn't reorganize. It compensates. Think about attention first. Attention is not just what you look at, but how you look. You can look softly or sharply, openly or selectively. When attention is consistently placed in the same areas, same thoughts, same concerns, same internal checks, it reinforces familiar pathways. Even awareness, when aimed in the same direction every day, becomes a stabilizer rather than a disruptor. Expectation works underneath attention like a current. You may not articulate it, but it's there. A sense of what should happen next, how long things should take, what change should look like. Expectation tells reality how to respond to your attention. If expectation stays the same, attention simply polishes the existing structure. Then there's identity. Identity isn't just your name or story. It's the felt sense of who is here having the experience, the one who observes, the one who understands, the one who has progressed this far. Identity sets the boundaries of what feels possible and what feels like too much or not me. When attention, expectation, and identity line up, reality stabilizes. Not because it's locked, but because it's coherent. Everything agrees. This coherence is not good or bad. It's efficient. It conserves energy. It maintains continuity, and it will continue doing so until something genuinely shifts. Here's the part that surprises most people. Awareness alone doesn't break coherence. It often strengthens it. If awareness is filtered through the same identity and aimed toward the same expectations, it simply makes the pattern more conscious, not more flexible. You see the loop more clearly, but you're still inside it. That's why you can feel very aware and very stuck at the same time. The invisible mechanism sustaining your current reality is not resistance, it's agreement. A quiet agreement between how you attend, what you anticipate, and who you take yourself to be. This agreement isn't verbal, it's somatic. You feel it as familiarity, as this is how things are. Even when you want change, part of you recognizes this reality as home, and the nervous system loves home. It will prioritize predictability over expansion every time. Not because it's afraid of growth, but because it's designed to keep you intact. When coherence is strong, change has to be gentle, or it will be rejected. This is why sudden breakthroughs are rare and often unstable. They disrupt coherence faster than identity can reorganize. The system snaps back. Sustainable change happens when coherence loosens, not when it's attacked. You don't loosen coherence by force. You loosen it by seeing it clearly without trying to escape it. The moment you try to break out, identity tightens, expectation sharpens, attention narrows. But when you simply notice how these three elements are already aligned, something softens. You may start to see how your attention habitually returns to certain narratives, how expectation quietly limits what you allow yourself to imagine, how identity subtly resists anything that would require a redefinition of who you are. None of this needs to be judged. Judgment only adds another layer of coherence. The power here is in recognition without agenda, because recognition introduces choice, not the kind of choice that forces change, but the kind that creates space. Space where attention can wander without needing to be productive, where expectation can pause, where identity can loosen its edges. This space is uncomfortable at first. It feels unstructured, undefined, as if something familiar is missing. That's coherence dissolving. Most people rush to fill that space. They name it, they frame it, they turn it into a new understanding. But doing that quickly rebuilds the same mechanism under a different label. The deeper shift comes when you allow the mechanism to be seen without replacing it. And that leads to a level of observation that few people are willing to stay with for long. Not because it's complex, but because it doesn't give the mind anything to hold. A level where attention turns back on itself, not to analyze, but to see what is actually watching. And that's where the observer itself begins to come into view. There comes a point where observation no longer feels like watching thoughts, emotions, or sensations. Those layers have already been seen. You know how they move, you know they arise and pass. That part is familiar. What is not familiar is what remains when you stop adjusting anything. Most people never stay here long. Not because it's hard, but because it offers nothing to hold on to. No insight to collect, no shift to chase, no position to stand in. At this level, observation turns inward in a way that feels almost backwards. Instead of noticing what appears, attention notices the sense of being the one who notices. Not as a question to answer, but as a fact to be felt. There is seeing. But where is the seer? When this question isn't asked intellectually, something subtle happens. The usual reference point weakens. The sense of I am observing loosens its grip. Observation is still happening, but the observer isn't as solid as before. This is where many people pull away. The mind looks for ground and doesn't find it. Identity feels thinner, less defined. And because identity has been the anchor for so long, its softening can feel disorienting. Not dramatic, just unfamiliar. At this level, there is no effort to maintain awareness. In fact, effort can't operate here. The moment you try to do something, you fall back into the previous layers. So this observation only remains when nothing is being managed. What's being noticed isn't content, it's structure. You begin to see how the sense of me forms moment by moment, how it subtly reassembles around preferences, expectations, and reactions, not as a problem, but as a process. And because you're not interfering, that process becomes visible. There is a quiet clarity here that doesn't announce itself. No fireworks, no rush, just a steady recognition that the observer itself is not fixed. It appears and disappears like everything else. This is deeply unsettling to the part of you that wants stability, because if the observer isn't solid, what exactly is in control? The answer is uncomfortable and freeing at the same time. Nothing is. Life is happening. Awareness is present. But there is no central manager orchestrating it. That manager was a construct, assembled from habit and reinforced by effort. At this level of observation, you don't try to dissolve the observer. You simply stop protecting it. And when protection drops, something unexpected occurs. Experience becomes more intimate, not more distant. Sensations are felt directly without commentary. Thoughts pass without needing interpretation. Emotions move without being owned. There is less separation, but this closeness doesn't feel emotional or dramatic. It feels ordinary, simple, almost too simple to be meaningful. That's why it's often overlooked. The mind wants significance. It wants markers. It wants to know that something important is happening. But here, importance dissolves. There's nothing to measure progress against, nothing to compare. You're not doing observation anymore. Observation is simply what is happening. This is the level almost no one reaches because it doesn't reward the self. It doesn't confirm growth. It doesn't strengthen identity. In fact, it does the opposite. It quietly undermines the sense of being someone who is aware, and for many seekers that feels like loss. If there's no observer to stand behind, who benefits from awareness? Who progresses? Who arrives? These questions don't get answered here, they fall away. What remains is a kind of neutrality that is alive, not dull, open, but not empty, responsive, but not reactive. Things still happen, choices are still made, but they arise without the same sense of ownership. This is where effort truly ends, not because you decided to stop trying, but because there's no one left to try. And without effort, reality begins to move differently, not faster, not slower, but with less friction. However, this is also where a new risk appears, a quiet one, because without a strong sense of observer, it's easy to drift, to disengage, to mistake neutrality for completion. Some people stop here and assume there's nowhere else to go, that this is the end. But stopping here creates its own kind of stall, not a return to effort, but a subtle hovering, a refusal to fully re-enter life without an identity to lean on. This is where many people get stranded, aware enough to see through old patterns but not surrendered enough to move forward without them. And that's why this level, as subtle and clear as it is, carries a hidden danger, one that shows up not as pain but as stagnation. The risk doesn't announce itself as failure. It doesn't feel like going backward or losing awareness. In fact, it often feels like stability, like having arrived somewhere that is quiet, neutral, and manageable. This is why stopping here is so tempting. At this point, you're no longer caught in obvious patterns. You don't react the way you used to. You see through mental stories quickly. You're less attached, less dramatic, less identified. From the outside, it looks like peace. But something is missing, and it's subtle enough to be ignored for a long time. Life begins to feel muted, not painful, not chaotic, just flatter. There's less friction, but also less aliveness, less surprise. You're not struggling, but you're not fully moving either. Days pass smoothly, yet without depth. This is the real risk of stopping at this stage, confusing neutrality with completion. At 84%, the observer has loosened, but it hasn't dissolved. Identity is thinner, but still present enough to hover. There's a sense of being beyond certain things, yet not fully inside life again. You're no longer resisting experience, but you're not fully meeting it either. This creates a quiet limbo. In this limbo, awareness is wide but distant. You see emotions arise, but you don't quite enter them. You notice joy, but it doesn't fully land. Pain shows up, but it feels abstract, like it belongs to someone else. This detachment can feel safe. After all the intensity of earlier stages, safety feels like relief. But safety without intimacy slowly turns into disconnection. The danger here isn't doing something wrong. It's stopping too soon because nothing feels urgent anymore. Growth doesn't push you at this point. There's no suffering to force movement, no crisis to demand attention, just a soft plateau that feels acceptable. And because it's acceptable, it can last for years. People at this stage often say, "I'm fine where I am," and they are, but fine isn't the same as fully alive. It's a holding pattern. What's really happening is that identity has found a new place to rest, not in roles or stories, but in distance itself. The identity now is, I am the one who sees. Or even more subtly, I am not caught anymore. This identity doesn't feel heavy. It feels light. That's why it's so hard to detect. But it still separates. It separates awareness from experience, observer from life, knowing from living. At this point, the system is incredibly stable. There's little inner conflict, few dramatic swings. Everything seems balanced. And balance, when it's maintained by distance, resists change. This is why reality may stop evolving externally as well, not in obvious ways, but in meaningful ones. Relationships don't deepen, creativity doesn't surge, purpose doesn't sharpen, things stay good enough. The real risk isn't stagnation as boredom, it's stagnation as comfort, and comfort rarely invites surrender. To move beyond this point, something has to be released that feels like a loss, not of suffering, but of control through distance, of safety through detachment. Most people don't want to give that up. They worked hard to get here. They've earned this calm. Letting go of it feels unnecessary, even reckless. So they stay. They live as observers of their own lives, rather than participants. Present but buffered, aware but not fully available. This is the cost of stopping at 84%. You don't fall back asleep. You don't suffer. You simply stop unfolding. And because there's no pain, there's no motivation to question it. Until something feels hollow, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually a quiet question surfaces. Is this all? Not in despair, but in curiosity. A sense that something deeper wants to move, but doesn't know how to without risking the calm that's been built. This is where many people turn awareness back into analysis. They study this plateau. They name it. They try to understand it. But understanding won't move you past it. What's required next isn't more clarity, it's courage. The courage to let go of distance, to re-enter life without the shield of being above it. This is where the final adjustment begins to reveal itself. Not as a big action, but as a small, almost counterintuitive shift. One that doesn't ask you to do more, but to stop interfering with something that's already trying to complete itself. What unlocks the final part of the process isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like a breakthrough or a revelation. In fact, it often feels like doing less than you've ever done before. That's why it's missed. The adjustment is simple, but it goes against everything you've learned so far. You stop interfering, not by deciding to stop, and not by creating a new rule. You stop because you finally see where interference has been hiding. In the way you hover over experience, in the way you keep a small distance, just in case. In the way you stay aware instead of allowing yourself to be fully inside what's happening. The final 16% doesn't respond to effort, because effort was never the engine. It responds to trust. Trust that awareness doesn't need supervision. Trust that life knows how to move without your constant input. Trust that nothing essential will be lost if you stop managing your inner state. This trust isn't an idea. It's felt in the body as a softening, a release of that last brace you didn't know you were holding. You might notice it in very ordinary moments. A conversation where you don't stay slightly outside yourself, an emotion you allow to be felt all the way through without labeling it, a decision you make without checking if it's aligned or conscious enough. These moments don't feel spiritual, they feel human, and that's the key. The final adjustment is not transcending life, it's re-entering it without the observer standing in between. Up until now, awareness created space. It helped you step back from patterns, stories, and reactions. That was necessary. But now, that same stepping back has become a habit, a default distance. And distance, even when peaceful, limits intimacy. The shift is letting awareness relax into experience instead of hovering above it. This doesn't mean losing clarity. It means clarity becomes embedded. You don't watch yourself live, you live. Awareness is there, but it's not central, it's not commenting, it's not checking. It's like the difference between watching yourself walk and simply walking. At first, this feels risky. There may be a flicker of fear. What if I lose it? What if I react again? What if I fall back into old ways? But that fear is just the echo of the old manager dissolving. When you don't interfere, something remarkable happens. Life completes its own movements. Emotions resolve faster. Decisions feel cleaner. There's less inner commentary, not because you silenced it, but because it no longer has a role. Reality responds differently to you now, not because you're doing something right, but because you're no longer asking it to prove anything. The subtle sense of waiting disappears. Time loosens. Moments feel fuller, not because they're intense, but because nothing is standing between you and them. This is the completion of the cycle, not a permanent state, not a finish line, but a way of being that allows reality to keep updating itself without friction. You don't feel awake all the time. You feel present, engaged, involved, sometimes messy, sometimes clear, always real. The final 16% is not about becoming more conscious, it's about becoming less self-conscious. And that changes everything. Because when you stop trying to prove you've awakened, life no longer has anything to push against. There's no posture to maintain, no identity to protect, no distance to preserve, just participation. This adjustment doesn't announce itself. You might even doubt that anything changed. But over time, you'll notice something unmistakable. Things start moving again. Not because you made them move, but because you got out of the way. And once movement returns, another question quietly follows. One that doesn't demand an answer, but lingers gently in the background. What if the next step was never about seeing more, but about holding on to less? When you finally let go, nothing magical appears. There's no explosion of insight, no permanent state to hold on to. What happens is quieter than that. Reality finishes what it was already doing. The cycle completes not because you forced it, but because you stopped interrupting it. Effort steps aside. Control loosens. And life, which never stopped moving, resumes its natural rhythm. Thoughts still come, emotions still rise, decisions still matter, but they're no longer filtered through the need to prove anything. The last shift was never about becoming more aware. It was about releasing the identity that needed awareness to mean something. When that falls away, experience becomes direct again. Simple, honest, alive. And the question that stays with you isn't dramatic. It's gentle, but persistent. What if the next leap doesn't require more awareness, but less attachment to who you think you've become? If you made it to the end, write this sentence in the comments. I stopped interfering. Toasani, and if this resonated with you, watch one of the videos appearing on the screen now. If you want more content like this, that's where the next layer continues.